Hello. Today I wanted to talk about psychic phenomena. Are they real, or is it all just delusion and lies? Obviously at the moment science doesn't have anything constructive to say about it. There are people working on the issue, but hardline scientists tend to dismiss all the research out of hand, mistakenly, I think. But why do I think that? Well, two reasons. First of all, there is one psychic phenomena we all experience every day, as long as we're well, and that is consciousness. And two, I have experiences of my own, which I will report later in the video, precognitive dreams and things of that sort. And there is actually a lot of research. I mean, some other critics talk about how a handful of interesting studies don't make a case for psychic phenomena, but actually there are thousands of studies, or at least over 1,000 good studies. So there's work to be done here. First of all, consciousness as a psychic phenomena. I've talked about consciousness before, so I won't go into it too much here, but as you're possibly aware, the current theories of consciousness don't actually make any sense. They're not adequate to describe the phenomenon. So we experience awareness. I realise, as far as I know, I'm the only aware one and you're all a bunch of zombies, but let's suppose that we're all aware, like it seems. And I know that I am, okay. Now, the scientific explanation for this is that it's caused by, generated by, electrochemical activity in the brain. For short, let's call it electrical activity. Same thing, in principle. But when you look at electrical activity elsewhere in the world, like in a computer, it doesn't make the machine aware. It produces pictures on a screen, but the machine doesn't know what it's doing. And why does a human know what it's doing, to the extent that it does? What goes on in our brain is like sodium ions and potassium ions pass along a membrane. They go in and outside of a membrane, and as they go along they produce a wave pattern, which is the voltage peak which travels along the neuron, produces chemicals at the end which activate the nearby neurons, and so the signal transmits and propagates throughout the brain. That is not awareness, that's electrical activity. People will say, yes, but you have to look at it from a higher level. You have to take the pattern as a whole and interpret that, and that's where you get your consciousness from. It's kind of like looking at the screen of your computer. The computer's producing activity, and you look at the whole pattern, and that's what you see on the screen, if you like. And when you interpret that, that's the consciousness. Or you could say it's like an ant's nest. A big ant's nest, and the ants are all wandering around, and if you're looking at them from a high level, like a naturalist, you might see them spell out the word hello or ant in their patterns of movement. So the ant's nest as a whole knows what it's doing, but the individual ants don't. I mean, it doesn't happen with ants, obviously. But that's the idea of the argument for consciousness in the brain. Of course it breaks down, because you need, in both cases, the analogy of the ants and the analogy of the computer screen. You need a conscious observer to observe the pattern. And if the brain is supposed to be generating the observer, who's observing the pattern? The observer that's being generated can't be the one that's observing the pattern, which produces itself, surely. So the argument isn't coherent. You have to have the observer first, I believe. So what we're left with, a dumb machine, basically, which obviously has something to do with it. We know that consciousness has more to do with the brain than it does with the bottom, okay, except for some people perhaps. But the explanations as they stand so far have no sensible explanatory power. There is a big gap in science. We know that because we have this one psychic phenomenon which is with us every day, all day, and there's nothing in science, the science of materialism, that has anything constructive to say about it as yet. Maybe they'll get there, but don't be fooled by neurologists telling you that it's down to electrical activity and patterns in the brain, because that does not produce anything like awareness. If they're saying, well, awareness is just what it's like to be this pattern of electrical activity, then what they're saying is that everything is aware. Or why only electrical activity? Why only electrochemical activity, perhaps? Why? It's nonsense, basically. Interesting, and it will help us to do things, to manipulate the brain, and we know that if the brain's damaged, people's states of consciousness vary. It's clearly got something to do with it, but there are reasons for thinking that it's nowhere near the whole story. In particular, one of these is near-death experiences, which are reported by a percentage, maybe up to 10% of people who have a near-death, and only a small percentage of those produce reports which are scientifically validatable, in the sense that they report about things that they couldn't have known at the time, and that has been validated before they learned about it. So, for example, there are people who've had their brains starved of oxygen, they've had a cardiac arrest, they've been out for like 40 minutes or so, no pulse, so no blood flow, no oxygen to the brain. And they report things like going along a tunnel, meeting people, being told they have to go back, or they report floating above the surgeons operating in the room, trying to revive them, and can tell about the process. Or they report, which are the interesting ones scientifically, they report about things going on some distance away that they could not possibly have heard, even though with no brain activity you're not going to hear anything or know what's going on. Just to be really sure, the ones that are interesting are the ones who report on activities from outside their field of view and range of hearing. There are people who report stuff going on from elsewhere in the world, and it's not told to them about it before they've reported it. So those are interesting. Like there was one woman who reported her non-smoking mother smoking in the waiting room, and things of this sort. You know, it's obviously a weaker kind of proof than with hard science, where you can measure a voltage on your meter and it tells you that there's a Higgs boson or something there, right? And you're dealing with people who are very clever when it comes to fraud and self-deception and things like that. But still there are plenty of cases of carefully evaluated by scientists circumstances that give pause for thought. And the near-death experience one in particular indicates that the mind can exist separate from the brain, and so do out-of-body experiences, which some people have. If your point of observation is out here, up in the air somewhere, looking down, the current explanation is that's a delusion, obviously. But the brain is not active, so how is it deluding anything? It could be a dream that you make up just as you're recovering to explain the circumstances. Yes, it could. But what about those cases where they've reported things that were not within their range, things from other rooms or from elsewhere in the world? You can look them up on the internet. If I remember, I'll stick a couple of links below. There's research from the... you can look at the encyclopedia on the Society for Psychical Research website. There's lots of material on the University of Virginia, UVA Department of Perceptual Studies, DOPS. There's lots of material there too, you can have a look. There are other sites. Experiments have been going on for years and years. Good quality ones as well, not like the old days where, okay, their experimental methods were not very clever and cheating was possible. They're much more careful about it nowadays. Because if you're going to get to the bottom of these weird phenomena, you really do have to be careful, because people are involved, right? And we're hopeless. In fact, the out-of-body experiences suggest, in these cases where the brain is inactive, when the person's apparently out of the body, maybe it's actually consciousness that activates the brain rather than the brain that's activating consciousness. We don't know enough about it, obviously, to be able to say, but that is a possible viable theory. Unless, as I say, the out-of-body experience is actually some sort of dream produced at the last instant as you wake up to explain, in a sense, what's been going on to yourself. Like when you hear fire engines in a dream and you wake up and realise it's just the alarm going off, right? It's like an explanation to deal with it. Well, that's the first reason for thinking there must be something to psychic phenomena. Consciousness, essentially. And you can say 1.5 reasons with near-death experiences, which quite a lot of people do have. The other one is my other main reason is my own personal experiences of precognitive dreams. I've had other psychic experiences as a child, but I don't particularly remember them anymore. But I still remember my precognitive dreams. I'll go through them in no particular order. The first one I call Tyrannosaurus Eagles. This was many, many years ago. I was a teenager. And I was dreaming, I was asleep, I was dreaming that I was walking down my road and there was a grass bank and there were some kids playing on it. Sort of a sloping grassy bank there. There were some children playing on it, and one of them was telling the others about Tyrannosaurus Eagles. And then I woke up and I laughed about that. I remembered the dream, I thought I laughed about that, and I knew it was a dream about the future, interestingly. So I thought, well, okay, that's funny. I had a good laugh. If I hear about Tyrannosaurus Eagles, I'll remember this dream, right? And I went back to sleep. Now, some considerable time later, I don't really remember how long, it was probably of the order of weeks or months. Say 1 to 6 months, something like that, somewhere in that region. I was walking along the street in the town, and I looked in the shop window of W.H. Smith, which is a stationery shop, and they had a plastic kite on display in the window. It was transparent plastic, but with a design of an eagle on it. And I thought, oh, that looks nice. No, I didn't buy it. I didn't want to spend the money. I went home, but then I thought, oh, all right then. And I went out again. I went into the town and bought it, and brought it home. And I waited for a windy day so I could actually fly it. And finally, one came, and I, behind my house, or my house was on a newish housing estate, and there was a hill with some woods in the back. And I went up there, because at the top there is a field. Well, there was then, I don't know what it's like now. This was like 30 odd years ago, or more. Crikey. Anyway, I went up there and I flew the kite. It was windy enough, just windy enough, but I flew the kite. But, as always happens in these stories, the string broke, okay, and the kite went sailing off over the trees. Off into the distance. I mean, I suppose it must have come down in the woods somewhere. I would never find it. I went home. And I sat down and I thought, well, if it did get past the trees, it would have sailed over my housing estate and maybe come down somewhere there. So if I walk down the road, maybe I'll see it. Maybe I'll find it. So I got up and went out. Got up off the sofa, went out, and was strolling down the road, idly looking around, thinking, well, maybe it fell down here somewhere, or maybe it was further down. And I passed this grassy bank, and there were some kids playing on it, and I heard one of them telling the others about Tyrannosaurus Eagles. Oh, bang! It was the same as in the dream. It wasn't like similar, it was the same, as I remember it. Obviously it's hard to report these things with 100% accuracy. Memories can be false and conflate facts and so on. But at the time, I remember that it seemed to me that it was the same as the dream. And obviously they had seen the kite. So I went over to them and told them about the kite, and they said, oh yeah, one of the kids, the kid who was talking about Tyrannosaurus Eagles and was scaring his pals with the stories, said, oh yes, he'd seen it come down, he knew where it was. It had come down in somebody's garden, and he ran off and fetched it. So there you go. First story. Another one happened when I was at college. I was in my first year in college, and I had a dream where I was working on a lathe, carving out some metal with some sort of chisel device. Okay, a lathe is a machine for turning wood or metal. It spins it rapidly, and you can make circular carving as a result. And in the dream, there was a chuck which was holding one of the tools, and I pushed that back away from the workpiece, expecting there to be a stop at the end of the track, so it wouldn't go off the end. However, I pushed it and it went off the end. There was no stop. And I woke up, and again I knew it was a dream about the future. Okay. 2 years later, I was in the third year at college, and we had to do our third year projects, and as part of that we were shown around the workshop. Now, the workshop was next door to the lab in which we usually did our experiments, and there were glass windows between the two rooms. However, I had not known that there was a workshop in it, because the glass windows have always had stuff piled up in front of them, and I'd never bothered to look to see what was in there. I didn't know. Okay. So we were shown in there, and there was a lathe, there was a bandsaw, there were various other tools for working with wood and metal. And for our training on using this equipment, so that we could build whatever we needed for our third year projects, I had to make a pulley. I still have it somewhere in the loft. So that meant cutting out metal plates with a bandsaw to go on either side, and turning a lump of metal into a wheel with a groove in it so that it could turn. And I made the metal plates with a bandsaw. That was fine. Sanded them down and what have you, and on a sanding machine, and then had the piece of metal metal disc on the lathe, spinning rapidly, carving it off. When I'd finished, I pushed the chuck back, expecting it to stop, and I remembered the dream at that point and caught it. And it didn't fall off. And I tested, there was no stop there. It would have fallen off. So technically that was not a dream of the future, it was a dream of what might have happened in the future, because I changed it. Okay. But it was dead accurate. And I had never seen the lathe. I didn't know there was a workshop, although maybe I'd unconsciously noted it somehow, but normally those windows were all piled up with stuff in front of them. And they were high up. You didn't particularly see them. But even if I'd known it was there, I would not have known that I was going to have to work in it and do that. So it's strange, and because I conducted the experiment, okay, I feel, I didn't have any more precognitive dreams for years and years. At the time, I was getting them in little ways quite often. Like when I was at school, I would often dream about my maths lessons in advance for some reason. It's weird, but maybe I needed the revision, I don't know. But that was very often. I would get little flashes of bits of the maths lesson in advance, like a day or two beforehand, that sort of thing. But they stopped with that experiment where I messed with the future. Okay, those dreams stopped for years. Another one. Some years later, when they were starting to come back a bit. I mean, I haven't had any really vivid ones since then. But I had one which was a mixed style dream. Precognitive dreams, when they're reported, are normally more vivid than ordinary dreams in certain ways. Now, my math lesson ones were very dreamlike. They were not more vivid. But the Tyrannosaurus Eagles one and the lathe dream were both quite realistic. They were really just like real life in that part of the dream. Now, this next dream, it was a dream, but it was more vivid, but it was definitely dreamlike rather than precognitive, in the sense that it was symbolic rather than literal. It wasn't showing me with a camera, this is what you're going to see. It was more symbolic. So this is only the tail end of the dream, because I don't remember the whole thing. It was a dream and just went on and on. But I was in a room, rather like a shed, dark, dingy, straw and newspapers on the floor. It was a mess, total rubbishy room. And the devil came and put a bracelet on my wrist. No, he didn't. I remember he injected me in the wrist with something. And I knew that meant that I would be the devil's slave for at least a few years. And I don't know how I knew that, but that's what I knew. Okay. And I sat down on the threshold of this room. It was sunny outside. And there was a bowl of chili con carne there for me. But I didn't eat it. I left. There was a way out, and I left. Now, I got a job not long after this dream, working for a company where I was working in the guy's basement flat. There were a number of us working there in a computer company. And it was shabby as heck, right? I mean, the carpet probably hadn't been effectively cleaned in years and years and years, and it was grotty, the place, right? Rather like the shed. Not as bad, but like it. And I think it's a little, mean to characterize the guy as the devil, but he wasn't paying me my wages properly, and I left, being owed about £8,000. I don't know if he actually wanted to sack me or if he just couldn't afford it. I think they were having some difficulties financially. But anyway, It didn't help me with my then debt situation. Having a job is supposed to help you, but this didn't. So that parallels that dream, and I remembered it and linked it with that dream in my mind. Now, obviously, it's symbolic, the forecast, but worthy of thought. Another one I had a while. I think it was before this one. When I was doing some computer contracting work, and this one, I was on a train going home one evening, and the train was passing along a trench like they do with banks on either side. This one, it was banks of lush grass, and there were buildings on the side, big glass-clad buildings. You know, the sort of buildings, the modern business type with 2 layers. So they have an inner wall, then they have an outer wall of glass windows to provide effective insulation, and it makes them look nice. I dreamed about that. And my next contract, I think it was the next one, was working in a place called Stockley Park in West London. And there the buildings are modern and glass, multiple clad with like an inner layer and outer layer of glass and this sort of thing. It was the same sort of building. So I was working there supporting British Airways and EDF Energy, I think it was, on their technical help desk. So that was and that dream was very vivid. The colours were very vivid as well. Precognitive, the vividness indicates that, I think. It seems to be a factor when people report them. So obviously that is not scientific proof. It doesn't prove it to anybody other than myself. But I know what I saw, and about 60% of the population can report precognitive dreams from time to time. I understand. So there's something to do with time and our perception that is not yet explained by science. Obviously we have quantum mechanics, which we know operates backwards and forwards in space and time, and may have something to do with it. But as we have no hook or handle on consciousness and how we can be aware of these things anyway, it's all in need of investigation. And psychic phenomena investigations are one route to it. Hard science is another. Get all these particles, all the dark matter particles that we know nothing about as yet. Get them all under our belt and figure out how they can work. But even if you have all the particles in the universe bouncing about, that does not make something aware. Molecules bouncing off each other, so what? How are they aware of anything? Absolutely nonsensical. Well, okay, so that's why I think psychic phenomena do have to be taken seriously. Obviously you have to be very, 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 very careful when you're testing them. But if you're sceptical, go and have a look on the websites and that I've mentioned. There's the Society for Psychical Research, University of Virginia, Department of Perceptual Studies, places like that. There's East Salem in California and places like that. The experiments are being done all over the place. Edinburgh, and so on. Have a look. It has to be investigated, and these are a start. So, tell me what you think below. Are you sceptical anyway? What do you think of consciousness? Do you think it'll be explained wholly by the current scientific paradigm, or do you think we'll need something entirely new to explain it? And psychic phenomena, how do they fit in? Have you had any strange experiences? Tell me. Bye for now, and don't forget to subscribe, Bye.